And now our feature presentation.
Alright, so stop me if this sounds familiar. A lone warrior, armed with a magic sword, a shape-shifting demon wreaking havoc in Japan, a climactic battle that ends in the warrior being transported to a cyberpunk future. But this isn't Samurai Jack. This is Frank Miller's Ronin. For all of you who've watched Samurai Jack as a kid, I present to you Ronin. This book actually inspired the creation of Samurai Jack, and it's easy to see when presented with some of the similarities. Fortunately, Samurai Jack wasn't just a one-note ripoff, but Genndy Tartakovsky's individual take on a similar premise. So today we're going to venture away from the more kid-friendly and simple Samurai Jack, and we're going to dive deep into the complex, dark, and messy Ronin. So Ronin was written by this dude named Frank Miller. For those of you who don't know, Frank Miller is a pretty big deal in terms of comics. He wrote some of the most influential works in the medium, and it's not hard to see his influence on a lot of comic-related media today. He wrote The Dark Knight Returns, Daredevil Born Again, Batman Year One, 300, and of course, Ronin. He and Alan Moore are the fathers of the late 80s shift of comics from the biff bam pow of the Adam West Batman into the comics are for adults, yeah, era of comics. Every time you hear someone say that they want to keep something gritty, real, or grounded, that's probably because of these two guys. In January 1981, Miller was doing penciling duties on this underperforming little title called Daredevil. The book wasn't doing so hot, and so Miller was dying to stretch his writing muscles. One day the writer was taken off and moved to another title, and Miller was given free rein to write. The sales actually rose so much for that book that it went from a bi-monthly schedule to a monthly one. He was responsible for making characters like Elektra and Stick, while also creating and integrating the Hand and the Chaste into the mythos of Daredevil. So, if you've watched Daredevil on Netflix, all that cool mythical ninja shit is, from this guy. This run lasted from January 1981 to February 1983. Daredevil's popularity skyrocketed, making him one of Marvel's most popular characters. During this time period, he also found time to draw a famous Wolverine miniseries in 1982 that the 2013 movie was based off of. So basically, even at this time, Frank Miller was a big deal. And this was even before The Dark Knight Returns, Daredevil Born Again, and Batman Year One, all of which came in a 2-year time period and basically made this guy a legend. So after Daredevil, Frank gets in the mood to make a book based on his own IP. He gets inspired by Kazuo Koike and Goseki Kojima's Lone Wolf and Cub and Mobius, this French artist. And Jeanette Kahn, a DC executive, works with him to make this prestige maxi-series book with all new coloring techniques and really great and thick paper stock called Ronin. If you're not really about the spoilerinos, you might want to pause this video and come back after reading it. It's a really cool experience, especially when you don't know what to expect. So, without further ado, here we go. Alright, so there's an old samurai and he has his apprentice. The samurai has a magical sword that drinks blood and makes it resistant to the dark magic of the shape-shifting demon Agat. However, the sword will not be strong enough to kill Agat without first tasting innocent blood. The old samurai is murdered by Agat due to his thirst for the cooch, and the apprentice, all sad and stuff, is about to commit seppuku. Before he kills himself, the old samurai Mufasas and tells the apprentice to find the sword and kill the demon. Now that the apprentice serves no one, he is known as a ronin, a samurai with no master. The samurai wanders for years and eventually gets to Agat. Agat's like, "Lamau, bro, you think you can kill me with this sword that's only tasted evil blood?" And then the ronin's like, "Oh yeah, that's a problem." He gets put in a chokehold, and while Agat's laughing, the ronin's like, "Actually, check this out," and impales himself, and Agat, therefore filling the innocent blood checkbox. Before Agat dies though, of course, he curses them, and they're both sealed into the sword. We transition over to Billy, who's seen this in some sort of a vision. Billy is this limbless dude with immense psychic abilities and a fucked up childhood because of it. He lives in this facility called Aquarius, that's made out of advanced technology called biocircuits, and he's under the care of Virgo, this advanced AI lady. There are a bunch of people who live in Aquarius and take care of stuff there, like this Caesar-looking dude, Casey, the head of security, and Peter, her husband, the dude who I guess made the biocircuits. Also, Aquarius, which is super advanced and safe, is in the middle of New York, which is now a desolate wasteland ruled by gangs and mutants and shit, so basically imagine if, like, all of New York was Staten Island. So Billy starts freaking out because, oops, turns out that the story is real and a magical sword was unearthed. Agat attacks the facility, and the Ronin contacts Billy and basically persuades him to give up his body. As the Ronin takes over Billy's body, transforming it and giving himself cybernetic limbs, part of the Aquarius explodes. The Ronin lands somewhere out in the city, and he goes around looking for a sword and fights a bunch of people, eventually gets a sword, kills a bunch of people, in self-defense, of course. Casey goes out to retrieve the Ronin, her men get sliced up by the Ronin, and she gets thrown into a pit by some people. The Ronin jumps in after her and rescues her from some cannibals. They fall in love and smash despite him slicing and dicing her employees hours earlier. Also, it's not as if she doesn't, acknowledge that. She acknowledges it, and then she just proceeds to sleep with him. It's very strange. Meanwhile, Agat shapeshifts and turns into the Caesar-looking guy who's the head of the facility, and then also meanwhile, Peter, Casey's husband, in case you forgot, is trying to investigate into this shit and finds out that, in fact, all of it is fake. This whole mythical story was just a television program that Virgo was showing to Billy because Billy is actually more powerful than anybody knows, and Virgo was manipulating him into doing just a bunch of weird shit. Also, Aquarius has repaired itself and has expanded into all of New York City. So, Virgo sends out some robots to capture the Ronin and Casey. The Ronin is captured and Casey escapes. She breaks into the Aquarius and finds Peter. Peter tells her the truth, gets shot, and dies. Then he comes back to life, possessed by Virgo, and explains that Billy's powers had given Virgo a consciousness. Casey kills the possessed Peter and finds the subdued Ronin. She then enters the fantasy and confronts Agat. The Ronin is like, "Oh, free me, Casey, so I can beat him." And Casey's like, "Nah." Then the Ronin's like, "Okay, then use the sword?" But Casey, knowing that this is all an illusion, pulls out a gun and shoots Agat in the head. Agat dies, because, he's really a robot. And Casey's like, "Hey, Ronin, I guess I killed Agat and you didn't. Guess you gotta seppuku yourself now." So the Ronin, being dishonored because a woman killed Agat instead of him, he seppukus himself while Billy is like, "Oh my god, ow, that hurts. And also, Virgo, you're a manipulative AI and I don't like you." Casey beheads the Ronin, and Billy brain blasts the entirety of Aquarius. The comic ends with the Ronin standing above the rubble, and Casey looking at him. It's like, ooh, is that Billy and Ronin's body? Is that the Ronin? Does Casey still love the Ronin, even though she knows it was, all a fantasy? Was Billy manipulating her telepathically to, fall in love with him? So many possibilities. So many layers. Also, yeah, that whole summary I just did was very heavily abridged, so if you really want the full story, go ahead and read it. I skipped over a lot. In this series, you can really see the influences of Lone Wolf and Cub and Mobius on Miller's artwork. In fact, you can see the flashes of what would become of Miller's art in the future. Ronin serves as a transition point between the cleaner lines of Daredevil and the more crazy and wild Sin City style that he employs to this day. Ronin is filled with this crazy impressionistic art that leaves a lot to the viewer's interpretation. It's filled with these scribbles that you could easily confuse as just being scribbles, but really have intent when you take a closer look. That, coupled with the colors from Lynn Varley, really make Ronin an interesting piece of art. If you read the book now and you've been exposed to things like Samurai Jack or Akira, Ronin gets even more interesting. Akira the manga wasn't even finished during the making of this book, and I can't even find anything where Frank Miller talks about its influences on the project. Maybe they didn't cross-pollinate, but there are definitely some striking ideas and visuals that seem to be inspired by Akira, like government facility housing an immensely powerful psychic teen with untapped potential, artificial limbs, and you can definitely see Ronin's influences on Samurai Jack, and with that, you have a work that has a clear through line in its influences. I think it's so cool that I can take something from my childhood like Samurai Jack and see that it was influenced by something else from the past that was cool, and then go even further back. You end up seeing this whole web of influences, and with that you can really see there's nothing new under the sun. The book is really confusing and really thrilling. It's also got some stuff to say about gender dynamics. The Ronin, who comes from this bygone era of women not being equal, or not so bygone as we'd like, is at equal points saved and doomed by this woman that he loves. Man, even reading this whole book, there's a master's thesis here on Casey's character and what she represents. Ronin has layers, man. Casey's shown off as this diversity hire, and even though she's shown to be competent, in the eyes of many, she's just a damsel in distress. Billy treats her as an object for his affections. Virgo views her as a respectable and important character, but ultimately not the most important. Virgo tells Casey that she should feel lucky, that in the illusion, in the story, she's a warrior. But in reality, Casey is pretty much our hero, at least for the last book. She takes everything into her own hands and brings together all the plot lines and stops Virgo. She rejects the idea that she's just a side character. Instead of freeing the Ronin to defeat Agat or even using the magical sword, the tool of the story, she rejects it completely. She hits Agat with that 360 no-scope and ends the samurai story. And that's not even the end, because Virgo isn't Agat. They're not linked together. By defeating one, she didn't defeat the other. It's not that easy, and instead, she outsmarts everyone and outsmarts the narrative. She uses the shame that the Ronin feels from not being the one to slay Agat to trigger the destruction of the illusion and Aquarius. It's a nice subversion of normal story tropes. She's not a wild style type of girl who's really badass only to complement the main dude's badassery. She takes complete control and shuts everything down. Billy turns out to be almost a secondary villain, Agat turns into a plot device, and the Ronin becomes a plot bystander. The real final conflict of the book is woman versus woman. It's the head of security versus an ever-evolving artificial intelligence actually based on her. The story opened up with a stereotypical macho samurai story, but Casey seized control of the narrative. Sure, she weirdly fell in love with the Ronin after he killed her soldiers, but, hey man, maybe it's the mutant Staten Island fumes. Overall, this book is really interesting. It's an explosion of ideas that culminated in one of Frank Miller's lesser-known books. The story is a little undercooked and the art is kind of hit or miss, but it's worth a read, especially if you're a Frank Miller fan. This book was also one of the first creator-owned books in the modern era. It kind of laid the foundations for all future creator-owned works. Ronin's a big deal, and not just because Samurai Jack was partially based off of it. Thanks for watching, stay cool, and stay fleshy.